Hi, I'm Dan McCoy. Welcome to the factory. So today we're going to talk about one of our most beloved confections here at Hill Country Chocolate, and that is our Gianduja. Gianduja is really a mixture of a nut paste, typically hazelnut paste, along with milk chocolate. And we go through an incredible amount of steps to create this confection. This is called the Cremino, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it later, but I'm going to tease you right now and tell you that it's just delicious. These are classic European confections that involve taking a fat-based product like nuts, combining it with caramelized sugar, and then eventually with a milk chocolate. And when you put those three things together, you create a confection that is very shelf-stable, but also has an incredible texture and flavor inside your mouth. Very, very common in Europe, not as common in the United States, but they go amazing with wine, but honestly, they're just fun to eat on their own. So today I'm going to walk you through the steps on how we create our Gianduja. Okay, so we start every recipe here at the factory on the whiteboard. We plot it out to make sure everybody's on the same page and we kind of know what we're doing when we put a recipe together. So this is kind of the basic way that we put together to make our Gianduja. We start by making the nut paste, and in this case we're using 4 kilos of hazelnuts and 4 kilos of sugar. So it's about 50-50 as far as the mixture goes. Now, we can't just mix the hazelnuts and the sugar together because number one, it would be hard to do. And number two, we need to remove some of the water because the enemy for making any of these Giandujas is water. I like to think of it as just like chocolate. If you add a drop of water to chocolate, you'll ruin it. If you add water to one of these Giandujas, you'll actually ruin it too. So one of the things we do is we want to take all of the sugar, all of the water out of these products, and we improve the flavor. So we take our hazelnuts. The very first thing we do is we roast them. We roast them for a long time, somewhere in the neighborhood of about an hour at about 280 degrees or so. I say about an hour because at 45 minutes into it, we start to pull those hazelnuts out. We cut them in half, and we want to make sure that they're roasted all the way to the middle, that they're not just roasted on the outside. If we see any white or under roasted areas inside the middle of the nut, we got to keep going because we want it completely roasted. That removes the water, changes the texture, and also dramatically improves the flavor. So for the most part, at our factory, if you see a nut served in a product, it's been roasted. We roast almost all of the nuts that we use in our products. The second thing is we need to make the sugar. Now, if you just added plain old white sugar to it, it wouldn't have a lot of flavor because white sugar is just, well, sweet. That's how you taste sugar. It doesn't really have any other flavor in your mouth except for sweetness. So what we want to do is introduce some caramelized flavors to it. And we've talked about that on this channel before, but caramel brings that Maillard reaction, that browning that occurs. So we make our caramel pretty simple. It's really 10 to 1. We'll take the same amount of sugar that we have hazelnuts, and we're going to add about 100 grams of glucose and to make the caramel. We add some water to make sure that it all gets mixed together and it can start to boil. And we cook this until it's almost burned. And we don't want to burn it, but we want to cook it where it's almost burned. And we'll show you what it looks like on the table when we pour it, but that is how we get to that big sheet of caramel these two elements really kind of make our Giandujas. Now the final thing is we add a little bit of salt. We also add a little bit of vanilla, not very much, but salt tends to enhance caramel, which in turn enhances our hazelnut paste. So here's the basic ingredients to make a nut paste, and this is basically what we start with. The first thing we do is we roast the nuts. Now these are blanched almonds, so we're making an almond nut paste today as well. These are slivered almonds. You don't really have to use those, but we just had these in the factory and this is what we decided to use. We roast every nut that we put inside one of these nut pastes to enhance the flavor. That's something that's kind of really important. Now these almonds, we probably don't have to do much more to. We can just put them in that stone melanger. But for the hazelnuts though, they're just too big. And if you try to put a whole hazelnut in that stone melanger, the wheels just don't like that. So we pre-grind them just a little bit in a mill so that they're smoother and it's easier to put them into the stone melanger. So that's the nut component. And then the other component that we have is that caramel that we made on the table. Same thing, you can't put big shards of caramel inside the table. So what we do is we actually mill it into a powder. So this is sugar that we cooked with a little bit of glucose. And our formula is really simple. It's about 10-to-1 sugar to glucose. And we add water to it so we can get it boiling, and we cook it until it's almost burned. And if you remember seeing on the table when we poured it, it was an amber color, it was really, really brown. When we mill it, it often looks like a light brown sugar, and that's where we want it. Of all the things, to me, when you make this kind of product in the stone melanger, that's the most challenging to do. It's the sugar. You wouldn't think it, but when you add this much sugar into that stone melanger with the big wheels, it tends to slow it down and bind it and make it really slow. So making the sugar really small actually can greatly kind of increase the efficiency of what you're trying to do. So this is basically the components of making a nut paste. We do about 50% by weight nuts and 50% weight by sugar. We make typically two different kind of nut paste here at the factory. We would do one with 100% hazelnuts, which we use to make our hazelnut gianduja, our crunchy gianduja. We use it in our Cremino. We also refine it to a very fine consistency or very fine texture so that it melts really well with the chocolate. We also make a product that's about 40% almonds and about 60% hazelnuts. It's a little bit different flavor. And then 50% of that combination is put with 50% sugar, so pretty simple math. And that has more of an almond texture. We don't refine it as much because we want a little bit more of a rougher, crunchier texture when we make those confections. But that's it. That's how we make our kind of famous gianduja here at Hill Country Chocolate. This is how we make our gianduja. We start by making a praline paste or a nut paste. And we put the ingredients like the nuts and caramelized sugar in this machine right here. This is a stone melanger, and we get this from TCF Sales in Round Rock, Texas. Great company. It's not a really complicated machine. It's a machine that basically spins the base, and inside what happens is there's big stone granite wheels. And those wheels actually are touching a granite base. And we put the nuts, the sugar, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of salt, and we use this machine to reduce the particle size of those nuts to make it extremely, extremely smooth. Now this machine is really cool because in the old days, the way that you increase the tension on a stone melanger was to tighten these connections here. But the problem with that is that as the nuts got smaller, the tension got looser. So you constantly had to be tightening these things up. It just took a lot longer. The newer machines, and this one actually is equipped with an air jacket. This air compressor goes to a piston, and this piston actually pushes down on the stone wheels. So we can set the air pressure right here to a pretty firm pressure, and as those nuts get smaller and smaller and smaller, the piston just pushes further down, meaning that it's much more efficient, we get a lot smoother product, and we get it a lot faster. Now, the perfect way to make a gianduja is what we've talked to you about so far, which is to cook the nuts and roast them over here, and do it separately, grind them into the powder and put them in the melanger. The other option is to make the sugar and to make the caramel, grind it up into a powder. But if you're doing this at home, and that's a lot of steps to go through to get the product, and you just wanted to create that flavor profile at home, you could do something else that we do here, which we use these particular pecans to make chocolate turtles or chocolate pecan clusters. I think that's what we're supposed to call them. So here's the thing. You could cook your nuts in a sugar mixture. So basically you make a caramel of sugar and water, much like we did before with about 10-to-1 sugar to glucose. And you add your nuts and you cook the nuts while you're actually cooking the caramel. That would roast the nuts and also would put a sugar coating on the outside of the nuts. You can grind it at that point in your food processor, and you could make something simple at home with almost a one step. Now, the challenge with that, and you have to be a little bit careful, is that you could overcook the nuts. Now, these pecans are really, really sensitive, so we don't do that with pecans here. We actually cook them separately. We boil the pecans in a sugar solution, we strain it out, and then we bake them in the oven so that we don't overcook the pecans, and at the same time we get a crispy kind of sugar texture on the outside. Okay, so the real question is, why do you go to all this work? Like, what do you get out of it? Because it's a lot of steps to go through to actually make a confection. Well, it's just simply amazing, because what we do is we take the nut paste and we combine it with chocolate. It's almost always milk chocolate with the nuts, because dark chocolate can overpower a nut paste if you're not careful. But we take about 50% milk chocolate and about 50% of the nut paste that we made, that artisanal nut paste, and we mix it together, and it makes a gianduja, or a duja if you just want to use a nut other than hazelnut. Don't let the snobby name get away with you, because honestly, it's just delicious. And these are some examples of some of the confections that we make. One of them is a gianduja that is basically, we take the 50% nut paste, 50% milk chocolate, and we combine it with puffed rice. So think of this as like a adult Rice Krispie. That's kind of the way we sell it here at the shop. We also make one by mixing it with a crispy crepe cookie from France. So it's got a little bit of a crunchy texture on the inside. I always tell people the texture kind of reminds me of that chocolate you get at Walgreens, the Ferrero Rocher that's wrapped in gold. Really, really delicious. Again, just the hazelnut nut paste mixed with milk chocolate, a little bit of a crunchy cookie that stays crunchy, and then we enrobe it in dark chocolate. And then actually, one of customer favorites. This is the Cremino. The Cremino is the classic confection from northern Italy and Piedmont. And it's a 3-layer confection. The bottom layer has hazelnut gianduja. The middle layer is white chocolate mixed with that nut paste, so it's kind of a white chocolate gianduja. And on the top, we put a thin layer of really delicious milk chocolate from Felklin, a company in Switzerland. So it's got this 3-layered texture, a little crispy on top from the milk chocolate, and then these beautiful, beautiful giandujas on the bottom. We don't enrobe this in chocolate, so it's just perfect like this. Now, these giandujas are great because they contain a lot of fat from the nuts, and so they go beautiful with any kind of wine that has bubbles. So think of a Moscato d'Asti. We have one of those here at our winery. When you take a drink of Moscato after eating a Cremino, it's just delicious because those bubbles tend to pop those fat globules inside your mouth, and you get just an amazing change in flavor related to these products. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on gianduja and how we make our nut paste here at the factory. We could buy it, but we find that we enjoy making it. We enjoy the aromas that happens when it fills the factory, and more importantly, we enjoy eating it.